If it's Monday, 11 more hostages just released from Gaza as Israel and Hamas agree to extend their temporary truce for 2 more days, paving the way for even more hostages to be released and for more aid to get to those who desperately need it. Plus, the gunman who allegedly opened fire on 3 students of Palestinian descent in Vermont is now charged with attempted murder as federal officials investigate whether the incident was a hate crime. And it's crunch time at the Capitol. Lawmakers are at odds over the future of aid to Israel and Ukraine as they consider an historic expulsion of disgraced Congressman George Santos. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake, and we're following breaking news. 11 hostages are now in Israeli territory, according to the IDF, after being released by Hamas, as an agreement to extend the Israel-Hamas ceasefire for 2 more days has been reached. This is video from Al Jazeera appearing to show the moment some of those hostages were handed over to the International Red Cross. In exchange, Israel is releasing 33 Palestinian prisoners, according to the Egyptian government. And we're now learning the names of the 11 hostages released today, shared by their families through the Hostage and Missing Families Forum. The group includes 3-year-old twins and 2 sets of siblings. No Americans were among those released today, according to Qatar. As many as 20 women and children held by Hamas could be released over the next 2 days, as the ceasefire has now been extended. The White House welcomed the news of the extended truce as National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby says the administration remains focused on bringing home the Americans still held in Gaza. That follows scenes of jubilation in Israel over the weekend, with roughly 40 Israeli hostages freed over 3 days in exchange for 117 Palestinian prisoners. Nearly 20 foreign nationals were also released as part of a separate agreement. We saw emotional reunions, including the first American freed, 4-year-old Abigail Eaton, whose parents were murdered by Hamas on October 7th, reunited with her aunt and uncle and grandparents at a children's hospital in Israel. For the Asher family, Father Yoni was reunited with his wife Daron and their 2 daughters, all 3 of whom were released on Friday. And 9-year-old Emily Hand also reunited with her family, seen in this video embracing her older sister. She can also be seen hugging her father, Thomas, in a video released by the IDF, showing another freed hostage, Hila Rotem, who turns 13 today, reunited with her family. Her mother is still being held captive. NBC's Richard Engel spoke with Hila's uncle outside the hospital about her condition now.
Hila is talkative. She speaks. I think she's still in a little bit of shock because she doesn't show a lot of emotions.
But even with you, she doesn't show much emotion?
Yeah, she speaks about it like it's a scene from a movie. My heart aches, my stomach is, turning upside down. It's very hard. I have Hila here, but I really need her mother back, and also my sister, of course. So it's very hard. Also, I think about my sister kept in captivity, knowing that they took her daughter.
An estimated 184 hostages are still being held in Gaza, and it remains unclear how many are being directly held by Hamas as opposed to by other militant groups. Meanwhile, the ongoing pause in fighting will allow even more humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip as the situation there remains dire. The White House said more than 200 trucks entered Gaza at the Rafah border crossing yesterday. That's the biggest convoy since October 7th. Joining me now is Aaron McLaughlin in Tel Aviv. Ali Rafah is at the White House. And I'm also joined by former NBC News Tel Aviv bureau chief Martin Fletcher. Aaron, I'll start with you. What else are we learning about these 11 Israeli hostages released today?
Well, Garrett, we just received a statement from the Israeli military confirming that the Red Cross has handed all 11 now former hostages over to the Israeli military. They will be accompanied by the Israeli military as well as special forces to the hospital where they will undergo a medical evaluation. And it's at the hospital in Israel that they would be reunited with their families. We're also hearing from the foreign minister of Qatar put out a statement detailing the nationality bodies of the hostages released. We now know that there are 3 French citizens, 2 German citizens, and 6 Argentinian citizens that were handed over to the ICRC. Dual nationalities, no Americans among today's release. Also, we're getting an official statement from the hard-hit kibbutz near Oz. All 11 of the hostages you see there on the screen came from this single kibbutz. Wow. The head of the kibbutz releasing the statement saying the news this evening brings a sigh of relief to our community. However, we remain deeply concerned about our loved ones that are still held hostage. We demand the return of all hostages immediately, whatever it takes. The statement noting that of the 139 remaining hostages, 49 are still from near Oz.
Aaron, the first group of hostages have been back in Israeli territory, in Israeli custody for a couple of days now. Do we know what Israel's been able to learn about the Hamas operation from the folks who they held?
Well, right now, the now former hostages are with their families. That is really seen as the priority. In terms of the process, it's a very specific process that these hostages go through. The minute they are transferred from the Red Cross to the Israeli military, they are immediately accompanied by experts, psychological experts, social welfare expert, and the expert actually they're assigned right when they cross from the border. That expert, psychologist, social worker, will follow them through their year-long recovery process. They're then brought to a hospital, they undergo a medical evaluation, then they are reunited with their families. That is being seen as the priority at this point. Now, in terms of handing over critical information, what may or may not have happened when they were in Hamas custody, well, we understand that the Israeli military will, depending on the medical evaluation and the psychological status of the hostage, then be able to interview them once they've reunited with the family, once they've spoken to a therapist. It does not seem, according to the information we have, that the children will be specifically questioned about that, Garrett.
And what more do we know about this extension now for a couple of days? How likely is it that it goes beyond those 2 days?
Well, that is an open question. This, from the very beginning, was seen as an extraordinarily fragile process. Many of the families of the hostages that I've been talking to are absolutely shocked that this process had made it this far. They never thought it possible that Israel could reach an agreement with Hamas. Now that the preliminary deal, the original deal, which is 4 days, is complete, now we're hearing from Qatar, Hamas. We're still waiting to hear from the Israelis on the confirmation of that 2-day extension. Each day would involve the release of 10 additional hostages. It's possible it could extend beyond that. But again, we're still waiting to hear from the Israelis. A key advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu earlier in the day was saying they are waiting for the completion of the exchange, the completion of this 4-day ceasefire. And then the Israelis are going to talk about whatever they've agreed to today in terms of that 2-day extension.
All right. Aaron McLaughlin for us in Tel Aviv. Aaron, thank you. I want to turn to Ali Rafa now at the White House. So, Ali, what are we learning about the role that the president and the White House played in getting this deal extended and the possibility that Americans might be part of a future release?
Yeah, Garrett, well, White House officials are saying that the president has been and will continue to play a very key role. They say he played a key role in not only the original ceasefire deal, but also resolving the obstacles over the weekend that resulted when Hamas had delayed for hours the release of another batch of hostages. And they say the president is also very involved in this extension and what White House officials hope will be an extension even further. They say that the president is continuing to work the phones with the leaders of Qatar, of Jordan, and of course with Israel. The president speaking with Prime Minister Netanyahu last night, saying that they have agreed to remain in very close contact over the next few days. And a large focus of that conversation that they had was the extension of this ceasefire. As far as the remaining American hostages, we heard from White House spokesperson Admiral John Kirby some updates as to their whereabouts, whereabouts, their conditions today. He was very honest with the American public as to what the U.S. government does and still does not know. Kirby saying that U.S. officials have been watching and waiting to see whether Americans would be among those released today, will be among those released in the coming days as part of this extension. And they say they're still hopeful that 2 American women who, like that 4-year-old Abigail O'Donnell who was released yesterday, meet the terms of release of this ceasefire. They're hopeful that they will be released at the very least out of this deal, but they say that they believe there are roughly 8 or 9 Americans still left in Gaza. Their exact locations and conditions still unknown. And Kirby made a point to say that the U.S. is still not able to confirm that Hamas is in possession of all of the remaining American hostages, saying that it's possible that they are with other terrorist groups within Gaza. And because of that, they could be in different locations. And because of that, their conditions could range significantly, Garrett.
All right, Ali Rafa at the White House, thank you. We're going to bring in Martin Fletcher now, our former Tel Aviv bureau chief. Martin, I want to come back to that idea about folks beyond Hamas, folks who might be hostages of other organizations beyond Hamas. But I got to ask you first, members of your family were among the hostages released by Hamas over the weekend. How are they doing? Have you been able to talk to them? How much more do you know about their condition?
And that's right, Garrett. So we had 6 members of my wife's family were released on Saturday. That leaves 1 member of our family who's still held hostage. Tal, he's a 38-year-old father. Look, everybody's, delighted and happy, of course, and celebrating the release, especially of the 3 children. We had a 3-year-old Yael, Nave was 8, Noam 12. They're all home and they're in the arms of their loved ones. But the question about when their father, Tal, will be released, he's among the men. And so the Hamas has said they're not going to release soldiers, male and female, or men of military age, military fighting age. So there's a lot of joy. But it's a very bittersweet occasion. Mostly people are just happy that the 3 children, the young ones, seem to be doing well physically. And we don't know yet, of course, how that's going to play out mentally.
No, and I can't imagine you will for a long time. I want to ask you about something that Ali touched on, which I feel like we could really lean on your expertise in this region. The idea that we don't know who has all of these hostages, that it's not just Hamas who holds hostages. Can you explain a little bit about that dynamic and what other groups might be at play here, and whether Hamas would even know, who is where in terms of hostages inside what's ostensibly their territory?
Yeah, well, Garrett, first of all, one has to emphasize that whatever Hamas says about who they're holding, how they are, and where they are, we have to take with a pinch of salt, because this is a period of psychological warfare, very much so. But we do know from early on that Islamic Jihad, who are another Islamic fighters group in Gaza, they said early on that they had taken about 30 hostages themselves. And then they also said that there were criminal groups in Gaza who had come behind the attacking fighters, behind the terrorists, and that they also may have taken people hostage. And we don't know where they are. So I think it's probably true there's some real confusion about where everybody is, but Hamas probably knows more than they're saying. A couple of days ago, Hamas said they only know the whereabouts of about 120 people. So I believe the number is something like another 190 are still to be accounted for. Yeah. So it's possible that other groups have some members of some of the hostages, and they're not involved in the negotiations, as far as we know.
On the subject of Hamas, the idea that they benefit from this ceasefire, right? They have the opportunity to regroup. They get to sort of take their breath militarily. Once the deal expires, whenever that may be, what do you expect to see happen on the ground militarily? And do you see Hamas trying to draw this out for more and more days to have that kind of military reprieve?
Yeah. The longer it lasts, the more it plays into Hamas's hands for exactly what you said: rearming, resupplying, restoring communications. In every way, the longer the ceasefire lasts, the better it is for Hamas, because this is, they win. I mean, Hamas shows the Palestinian people that the only way to get anything out of Israel and to get Palestinians released from Israeli jails is through violence. And so this is the pictures look terrible for the people of Gaza, but for Hamas, it's pretty much a victory. So the longer the ceasefire lasts, the better for them. For Israel, too, don't forget, it's also a matter of resupplying, focusing on which task comes next. So there's some advantage for Israel, but it's a small advantage. And the Israeli prime minister and the military leaders of Israel have stressed, have emphasized that they want to get back to war as soon as this negotiations dry up with Hamas about releasing hostages.
Well, there's political pressures here internationally, too, from other countries where the idea of a ceasefire has been more popular. There might be more pressure on Israel to keep a ceasefire in place. I want to ask you about another part of this conflict, Martin, that hasn't gotten as much attention, but that I feel like could blow up at any time, and that's what's going on in the West Bank. We've seen this increase in settler violence in the West Bank. The President Biden's proposed visa bans against people who might be perpetrating violence there. How concerned should we be, should the Israeli government be, about further outbreaks of violence as the tension continues to rise there in the West Bank territory?
Look, I think the idea of a Palestinian uprising on the West Bank it's this close. Same way as we've been saying in the northern border that all-out war with Hezbollah in Lebanon is this close too. Now, the West Bank is very, very volatile. Israel's been operating inside West Bank towns, I believe, daily, nightly, almost since this whole disaster began, arresting people, in particular members of Hamas. Hamas is quite strong in the West Bank. Not as strong as the ruling organization in Ramallah, Fatah, but the Hamas is strong. So Israel's been arresting as many of those Hamas leaders as they can. They've been having gunfights in Palestinian towns at night. There's a question of the Jewish settlers who feel they've been given the green flag by this extreme right-wing government in Jerusalem. So there's a lot of friction points: settlers, Palestinians, Hamas, the Israeli army. You know, it can blow any time on the West Bank.
Martin, I'm so glad we have your expertise on a day like this. Martin Fletcher, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Garrett.
And turning now to Burlington, Vermont, where 48-year-old Jason Eaton, the suspect in the shooting of 3 students of Palestinian descent, pled not guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder today. The students were visiting the homes of one of their families for the Thanksgiving holiday. According to the chief of police, the 3 men were walking down the street, speaking in both English and in Arabic. 2 were wearing keffiyehs. It's a traditional Palestinian headdress or scarf, when they were approached by the suspect, who just began shooting. All 3 victims were hospitalized. 2 are in stable condition, and the 3rd sustained more serious injuries. In a statement moments ago, President Biden said he was horrified to learn about the shooting and was praying for their full recovery. Attorney General Merrick Garland said the FBI and the ATF are investigating whether this shooting was a hate crime. And at a press conference this afternoon, Burlington Mayor Weinberger called the shooting the most shocking and disturbing event in the city's history. The uncles of 2 of those victims also spoke. Here's what one of them had to say.
Kenan grew up in the West Bank, and we always thought that could be more of a risk in terms of his safety, and sending him here would be the right decision. And we feel somehow betrayed in that decision here, and we're just trying to come to terms with everything.
Joining me now is NBC News investigative correspondent Tom Winter, who's been all over this story since the weekend. So, Tom, what more do we know in terms of the details about the suspect and the shooting itself?
Well, Garrett, through the course of the day, we're starting to learn more details, not only from police, but former employers of this individual identified as Jason J. Eaton. He's 48 years old. He's from Burlington. He's from, according to police, across the street from where this very shooting occurred. Apparently, when ATF agents knocked on his door shortly after 3:30 yesterday afternoon, he told them, quote, and I'm reading from the court documents, "I've been waiting for you." They asked him if he had a gun in the residence. He only said that he had a shotgun. It turns out, according to police, he had 3 shotguns or rifles. And on top of that, they say he had a .38 caliber pistol whose ammunition type and manufacturer and a specific part of that ammunition matched the exact ammunition that was found at the shooting scene. So that's why they ultimately made the arrest in this case. Now, the big question is, why? Why did this happen? What is the motive? And apparently he was not talking to police after he requested a lawyer at his apartment.
Yeah, so the Attorney General said that the FBI and the ATF are investigating the idea that this is a hate crime. I mean, on its face, it certainly looks that way. But what does an investigation into something like that entail, especially if the suspect's not cooperating?
Right, Garrett. So there's a couple of different ways that they can get at motive without this individual saying another word. And one of those ways, and we know that they're doing this, they seized a backpack full of hard drives. They seized 5 iPhones. They also got 5 cell phones, I should say, as well as an iPad. So they'll go through all that and see if this individual had any sort of writings, any sort of a manifesto, any sort of statement. What have they been consuming? What have they been talking to others about? Has he made any statements? We've looked through the NBC News investigative team and our social news gathering team have looked through his social media accounts. There doesn't appear to be anything that directly references this shooting, but of course what he has on his person or in his apartment could be an entirely different matter. And the FBI's CART team, the computer analysis team will go through those things, and then that might ultimately help come up with a motive here. And if there is a motive against these individuals purely because they were Palestinian Americans or presumed to be from the Middle East for wearing 2 of the 3 wearing the keffiyehs, as you talked about earlier, that would be something that perhaps could be chargeable.
And we've talked about this before, but the DOJ, all these local police departments, they've all been warning about upticks in violence against both Jewish and Arab communities. What additional steps are the feds taking to address this kind of violence?
Yeah, Garrett, this is the hardest type to stop, right? Because this individual apparently just got out of his apartment complex and started firing without saying anything, according to police. So the big question here is, what do you do with an individual like this that just decides to act out on their own, purchase the weapon back in April, so there's no immediate nexus to any sort of weapons or explosives buys? It's just very difficult to stop this type of thing outside of just doing the best you can to monitor any potential individual like this.
All right, Tom Winter, appreciate your reporting on this. And coming up, Congress is back in business today with lawmakers facing a fierce debate over the future of foreign aid, a potential House expulsion vote, and a tight timeline to get it all done. We're live on the Hill with the very latest developments. Plus, clash of the campaigns. It's Ron DeSantis versus Nikki Haley in the race to be the top Trump alternative in Iowa, which is 49 days to go until caucus day. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The Senate is back at work today, and while not much work gets done in most workplaces between Thanksgiving and New Year's, there are only 12 legislative days left before the end of this year, and Congress has a lot to get done. Number 1 on that list is negotiating a deal on foreign aid to both Israel and Ukraine. We're also keeping an eye out this week for another item on the congressional to-do list, a vote on whether to expel Congressman George Santos from his seat for misusing campaign funds and a host of other alleged transgressions and federal crimes. NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor joins me now. And Sahil, the Senate's back from recess. We're right back where we left off with foreign aid to Ukraine and Israel back on the table. But when I hear anything in Washington is conditioned on a deal on immigration, I get a little bit nervous that it's going to get done. What are you hearing about the path to get those items across the finish line?
Yeah, Garrett, be very skeptical that a Congress that has not been able to reach an immigration deal in several decades is suddenly going to be able to do one in the next few days or weeks. That is the centerpiece of the logjam here, at least according to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who has said he wants to bring up President Biden's national security supplemental, the whole $105 billion, as early as next week. He is criticizing Republicans for demanding restrictions on asylum and parole, changes to immigration laws as a condition for passing Ukraine aid. That is a serious obstacle in the Senate, because even Ukraine supporters like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell have sided with the conservatives who want those immigration changes as a condition. Then there's Israel aid, which also faces a rocky path. The House has passed a mostly partisan bill on Israel aid that Democrats say is going nowhere in the Senate. And in the Senate, it's unclear whether this large package that Senator Chuck Schumer is trying to move forward can pass, in part because there's a division among Democrats as well as to whether to slap conditions on aid to Israel. Senator Bernie Sanders, a leader of the progressive wing, saying that there should not be a blank check approach in Israel and that the United States must not be complicit in violations to international law, essentially wanting changes in the way Israel has been operating, at least the Netanyahu government has been operating. So it's a Rubik's Cube at this moment, unclear how this gets resolved.
There is a timing issue, but they can always add more work days till the end of the year. Congress is famous for extending their own deadline if they have to. Can we talk about George Santos very quickly? Do you think we see that vote this week? What happens next in that drama?
Well, there is a privileged resolution out there, and the rule is that when one member calls it up, it has to get a vote within 2 legislative days. And it's very possible that this could happen within just the next 2 legislative days. The Ethics Committee recently put out a damning report on George Santos, and the Republican chair of that panel, Michael Guest, has said that there are egregious violations that Santos is guilty of, including misuse of campaign funds, deceiving donors, filing false campaign reports, fictitious loans, generally trying to enrich himself. And Santos has himself indicated that he knows he will be expelled. It seems like his days are numbered. This could happen as early as Wednesday or Thursday. The House comes back in tomorrow. We'll see if that privilege resolution is called up. Garrett?
The days are numbered, and the number may be small. Sahil Kapoor, thank you for your reporting. And up next, it's crunch time for the Republican presidential field. We're checking in on the road to Iowa and the road to the White House with just 7 weeks to go until the first primary contest. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. With just 7 weeks to go now until the Iowa caucuses, every week is a big week for the remaining Republican presidential candidates. Vivek Ramaswamy has 6 events scheduled throughout the state just tomorrow as he looks to reach as many Iowans as he can before the Republican caucus. Former President Donald Trump will return to the state for 2 rallies on Saturday in Ankeny and Cedar Rapids. He's got a pretty significant lead in our latest NBC News Des Moines Register Mediacom poll. And on Saturday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is set to complete what we call the full Grassley. That's what it's called when you visit all 99 Iowa counties during one campaign cycle. DeSantis will be holding a rally with the state's governor, Kim Reynolds, in Newton as his campaign looks to fend off Nikki Haley, who's been gaining ground in the polls in Iowa and elsewhere. Joining me now with some insight on the Republican presidential primary is Amy Walter, the publisher and editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. Amy, I'm not a big math guy, but it seems like both Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley can't both come in second in Iowa, and it seems like they both really need to at least come in second in Iowa.
Well, I think the pressure is even more on Ron DeSantis to come in second, or, hey, maybe even first, but that looks like a longer shot at this point than we've seen really going back 40 or 50 years. We've not seen somebody with a lead this big, like you said, like you pointed out in your NBC poll, go on to lose it and lose the caucus. But DeSantis not only has the governor behind him, this weekend he also got, or earlier last week, he got the endorsement of Bob Vanderplaats, who is the head of significant evangelical constituency. The last 3 endorsements that he made in the caucuses, those folks all went on to win. So he's got the institutional support in the state. But underneath that, there's not that same level of grassroots support that he was hoping he would find. And you're right, Nikki Haley becomes another factor here, not just in edging him out for second place, but I think she benefits just from getting enough momentum through to New Hampshire.
She seems to have by far the more plausible path for the day after Iowa 100%. Through the remaining states.
100%.
If she has the money.
If she has the money, and also the momentum. You know how quickly the perceptions about who is the front runner or who has the momentum after Iowa. And
I mean, Rick Santorum's 8-vote win in Iowa created the boomlet that was.
That's right. That he took all the way until, well, he ran out of running room, and Mitt Romney ultimately succeeded. So I do think that for Haley, just a good third place finish, getting close enough to show that she's still in the race, take that to New Hampshire. And then let's see if Chris Christie can really hold on to a lot of those votes that he currently holds right now. If he's the guy who's not really in the news anymore.
Is that the piece for Haley? Because I'm struck by the challenge where she has, where it's almost like, herding cats, where she's got to consolidate the not Trump vote, right? And that means getting those voters from Chris Christie without alienating some Trump voters who she needs to collect too if she's actually going to be the nominee.
That's been the challenge for every candidate not named Trump from the very beginning. DeSantis hasn't been able to figure out how to put those two groups together. I mean, what DeSantis and Haley seem to share is the belief that the best way to bring those two groups together, the sometimes Trump and the never Trump, is with an electability argument.
The post-Trump.
Yes, the post-Trump is with an electability argument. And yet that really hasn't been very effective either, because when we look at the polls right now, Donald Trump is doing very well against Joe Biden. He's not doing worse than, say, a Ron DeSantis. Haley's doing slightly better, but it's not that Trump is losing. And so that makes the electability case really problematic. I think if you're Haley, what you're just hoping is you get a strong enough showing out of Iowa to be able to live another day, to get to a place like New Hampshire, which does have a lot more of the sort of not Trump constituencies and independent voters, and then hope in the warmer climate of South Carolina, your friendly constituents come home. But mostly what you're hoping is between those dates, something else happens that shifts the trajectory of this race. Namely, do perceptions of Donald Trump and these legal cases against him start to matter more as we get into election season? It hasn't so far, so I don't know that it will.
I want to come back to DeSantis for one more quick point here, because he spent a ton of money in Iowa to try to move the needle. There's been a lot of reporting led by NBC about the infighting in his super PAC. I don't care about staff stories, but campaigns that think they're doing well don't generally pick each other apart in the press. Should he be spending his money to, like, boost Joe Biden? Is that the most helpful thing he can do to improve his electability argument?
To make Donald Trump look weaker.
I mean, did they need to just fundamentally overhaul their strategy in the time they have left?
I don't know that they can fundamentally overhaul who he is as a candidate and what his appeal is.
Yeah. All right, Amy Walter, we have to leave it there. I always appreciate these chats.
I do too. Thank you
for
so
coming
much.
in. All right, after the break, ditching the dysfunction, I'll talk to Congressman Dan Kildee, who's joined a growing list of House lawmakers not seeking re-election. We'll talk about his decision and the state of our politics. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. It's now the holiday season, a time for seeing loved ones, and for members of Congress, apparently a time to decide they won't seek re-election. We're only at the beginning of the holidays, and already a lot of representatives are deciding to call it a career in the House as partisan squabbling and dysfunction reach new levels in the Capitol. Check this out. As of today, 32 House members say they will not be running for re-election next November. And this list is guaranteed to grow as filing deadlines approach in more and more states. Now, these names include plenty of representatives seeking higher office, but it also includes members of the so-called governing wing of the House, the more moderate members known for across-the-aisle deal-making. Joining me now is one of those retiring members, Michigan Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee. So, Congressman, thank you for coming in. You stepping down could mean that your seat flips to the Republicans. You've said this is the right decision for you and for your family, but do you worry about it being the wrong decision for your party?
Yeah, there's never a good time to leave when it's one of these toss-up districts, that's for sure. But after winning this particular district by more than 10 points in 2022, I felt like I've at least shown the way to win. It won't be any easier. I'm presuming President Biden will be reelected. It won't be any easier in the midterm. So there's never a good time to leave. But there's never the wrong time either when it comes to this. It's a personal decision long before it's a political calculation. And for me, the personal choice became pretty apparent over the last couple of months. It was time for me to come home.
How much did the fact that you were looking around and seeing your colleagues retiring, headed for the exits, factor into your decision? I mean, you've talked about the dysfunction in the current Congress. If it's the serious people leaving and the kind of less serious people staying, I imagine that makes it a less appealing workplace to stick around.
Yeah, that's part of the calculation, because in the personal decision is whether I will continue to make the trade-off between the loss of connection to family and friends right here at home to go do the work in Washington. And when what we've seen is not just partisanship, but as I guess we'd all describe it, dysfunction. What we're seeing right now is not a problem of partisanship. It's a problem that the particular Republican Party, as it's currently constituted, is incapable of governing and incapable of compromise unless, held to an extreme deadline. That's no way to work. So, yeah, it's part of the calculation. But again, it's only in the sense that I weigh continuing to work in this environment against, continuing to be not at home for more than half of the time. And that was too much to take.
I totally get that. I'm curious. I mean, you talked about presuming President Biden wins in 2024. I don't know if that's a presumption you can just make. I mean, talk to me a little bit about your state. Are you concerned at the way Michigan has grown apparently more competitive as we look ahead to next year?
Yeah, it will be a battleground state, no question about it. And we've proven that we know how to win. We did it in 2018. We did it again in 2020. We obviously did it in 2022. 2024 has a unique set of challenges. It's a presidential year. But I think it's really important to not misread some of the polling. The polling measures not only the current horse race, I should say, but also measures the enthusiasm in the moment. And one thing I've seen is that this is going to be a race, more than likely, between Donald Trump and President Biden. President Biden's supporters are more thoughtful, maybe more circumspect. President Trump's supporters treat this like a religion, like he's a religious figure. There's no dissuading them of his perfection. And so their enthusiasm at this early stage is always going to show up as being more pronounced than those of us who kind of sit back and weigh the equities before casting a ballot. So it's going to be a tough race, but I don't think we should get too tangled up in these polling, the recent polling.
Then let me ask you this. Is it a 2023 issue or a 2024 issue? You represent a part of Michigan where you have a lot of Arab American, Muslim American constituents concerned about the way that the Israel-Hamas war is being conducted and the White House's response to it. Do you worry about those Americans turning their back on this president in 2024?
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern because I know there's a lot of concern within the Arab American and broader Muslim community regarding the U.S. support for Israel in this moment. Now, I happen to be a supporter of Israel's right to defend itself, but I share many of the concerns that many of my constituents have raised with me, that we can't be a blank check, that Israel has to be held to international standards and be accountable to international law. And the targeting of civilian populations is completely unacceptable. So I get that. And it is a political challenge. For me, the conclusion I come to about my criticism of Israel has nothing to do with the politics of the moment. I think that's probably true for President Biden, but it will potentially have an effect.
Does he need to do more to address it going forward?
I think the real question is how this issue gets resolved.
Yeah.
You know, it's my hope that now we're in 4 days of a so-called ceasefire in order to get, the hostages released and get humanitarian aid delivered. I understand another 2 days have been added. Look, if we can do this 1 day at a time and negotiate peace, maybe the United States can assert itself and try to find a path forward for that region. I don't believe that a pure military solution will ever be the solution to the problem. We've got to get to a place where we're negotiating. I hope the president, takes the bully pulpit that he has on the global stage and tries to encourage that we get to that point sooner rather than later.
Last question, I think, talking about deal making here. We've been talking a lot about the aid package that's going to have to work its way through the House. Obviously, the House has already passed a Israel aid bill that's probably going nowhere in the Senate. Are you willing to accept some kind of cobbled together deal here that might include changes at the border or on immigration policy, if that's what it takes to get Ukraine aid, Israel aid, kind of all of those priorities across the finish line? What does a deal like that look like?
Well, it looks like compromise, and I'll have to weigh the equities once I see what the actual deal looks like. But in broad form, I'm definitely willing to move forward on something that supports our ally Ukraine in their struggle against Putin, that continues to help Israel defend itself in a way that does not make matters worse. And of course, we do have a problem at the border. And the question is, how do we solve it? I do believe we need more resources there. So the details matter on all of this. I haven't made a judgment yet on whether or not I would support the final package. But if all aspects of this are reasonable and balanced, then as I consider myself part of the governing caucus of Congress, I would certainly look fairly upon that.
Governing for a little while longer. Congressman Kildee, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Garrett.
All right, turning now to Georgia, where ceremonies honoring the life of former First Lady Rosalynn Carter have begun. The motorcade carrying her remains arrived at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum in Atlanta earlier this afternoon. The public will have a chance to pay their respects later this evening. Meanwhile, former President Carter, who's been in hospice since February, is in Atlanta and is expected to attend a service tomorrow at Emory University. President Biden and Vice President Harris are also expected to attend that service. Rosalynn Carter passed away last weekend. She was 96 years old. Welcome back. With Thanksgiving break over now and finals week looming just a few weeks from now for high school and college students, we thought we'd offer a couple of history lessons ahead of the 2024 election, which is now less than a year out, if you can believe it. First, some bad news for Democrats, who point to then-President Obama in poor polling shape at this point in 2011 as proof that President Biden's re-election bid has no cause for panic. Our latest NBC News poll from earlier this month shows the president trailing Donald Trump by 2 points among registered voters. But our NBC News Wall Street Journal poll from November of 2011 showed then-President Obama actually leading Mitt Romney by 6 points among registered voters. And keep in mind, Mitt Romney was not the dominant Republican frontrunner at that point. There is, however, historical evidence that a Biden-Trump rematch could advantage the current president. An NBC News analysis found that election losers usually lose in their rematches, too. In fact, just 16 times in 69 rematches of Senate and gubernatorial rematches did the candidate lose the first time, go on to win in a rematch. It's about a 23% chance. I said I'm not the math guy, but I'll do my best. I'm joined now by my panel, Idris Khaloun, Washington bureau chief for The Economist, Maria Teresa Kumar is president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, and Sarah Chamberlain is a Republican strategist and president and CEO of Main Street Partnership. So, all right, Idris, which of those historical analyses do you think is most cogent as we look at 2024? The sort of upside-down polling from 2011 to now, or the idea that these rematches just don't seem to change things very much for the loser?
You know, it's such an exotic scenario, right? You have to go back to Grover Cleveland to see a president who's trying to take back, or maybe even Teddy Roosevelt. So I think that maybe the Senate and gubernatorial rematches might not be the one to look at, but the poll numbers are certainly concerning. Polls tend to move over time, but if you're President Biden and you think that your opponent would be as fatally wounded as he ought to be, this is not a good starting point for the election.
The Democrats love this 2011 comparison, but having covered them both, Mitt Romney is not Donald Trump, not in comparison now, not in comparison then. What do you make of numbers like that, showing the president underwater, especially when you compare them to the last Democratic president?
Well, I think that there is absolutely a cause for concern. However, if we see what happened during the midterm elections, when up to that point, so Biden was underwater, but who came out and voted during the midterms actually basically said there was no red wave. You didn't see a defection. If anything, you actually saw an increasing turnout. I also think that the Democrats, once they are on the campaign trail and are able to remind what Donald Trump stands for, not just this fact that he has this anti-democratic force around him, but that he wants to repeal the ACA, that he wants to institute mass deportations, and that he doesn't, that he is part of a party that wants to take away a woman's right to choose. I think that then all of a sudden you're going to see something that's more balanced. Do the Democrats have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. Should they focus only on current registered voters? No. They have an opportunity by increasing their base through young voters. We're expecting roughly 12 million young voters to come of age. And if you ask a young voter, do they believe in climate change? They do. Do they believe in access to abortion care? They do. Do they believe in the system? That's the question mark.
Young voters have been noticeably cool to President Biden in our polling, though. Is that an opportunity for Republicans, or is that a mirage, the idea that young voters at least appear to be more open to Republicans here?
I think it's a mirage, unfortunately, for the Republican Party. I have a daughter who's getting ready to step into 18, and she doesn't like Joe Biden. She thinks President Biden is too old. He is older than her grandfather, so that's really old to her. But she's not necessarily a MAGA person either, for the reasons you already mentioned. So I don't know where they're going to go. I mean, I think the Democrats can certainly capture them, but I think that the Main Street Republicans, the conservative members, are going to fight for them for a lower ballot.
Was the banging sound I heard over the weekend the kind of Republicans who you work with slamming their heads into tables when Donald Trump started talking about repealing the ACA again over this weekend? Here's an issue I thought we were never going to talk about again in modern politics, and Donald Trump serving it back up.
You heard that too. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it was scary. And the text messaging I was getting was like, really? Why do we have to revisit this?
Is there room for a health care debate here at the table? Democrats must be thrilled by this opportunity. What does that look like if it becomes part of the general election conversation?
Well, you saw the president and the White House leap on this. They're really happy to talk about Donald Trump wanting to repeal the ACA. It went really poorly when he was president. It's an issue that they are on comfortable terrain on, whereas the ones that Donald Trump would like to talk about, immigration, climate change, inflation, are ones that they're on the back foot on. So the more that he makes that issue salient, the better it is for them.
I feel like all of a sudden I've been transported back to 2018.
Yeah.
If Democrats can run on health care and on reminding folks they don't like Trump, those two do seem to be kind of like the two key pieces to keeping the Democratic coalition united.
Well, and you also have policy that the president has signed into it. So when we talk about climate change and getting young people excited, they basically have $1 trillion package that they can point to. When you talk about codifying Roe versus Wade, the only way to do that is to have an active member in the House, in the Senate, and in the White House. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that there's a coalition to be made saying, look, not only did you vote, but you also have receipts to show that when you vote, you actually change systems. And Donald Trump, for so many people, is the antithesis of democracy. And what he represents and this idea of creating a divisive America in order to win doesn't sit well with most voters, regardless if they're Republican, Independent, or Democrat.
Well, the polling that we show is maybe they're not anxious to vote for Trump, but they really do think Biden is too old. He's slow. He walks slowly. I mean, they're like, is that really what we want leading the country? And the answer is no, and I'm not sure polling is going to change on that. He's an old gentleman.
So it's interesting. We actually did very similar polling last April going into the midterm, and we found that a lot of people said, we don't want Biden. We're like, okay, who do you want? And no one surfaced.
This is the challenge, right?
Challenge.
This is the challenge, to find the person who the voters don't like either candidate, and who do they go for? I mean, what do you do in a political environment like that? How does an election like that play out? And does it mean we're going to seriously have to worry about third-party spoilers, plural, in this race?
It's really hard to predict how third-party candidates are going to go. The ones that we have now are particularly idiosyncratic, right? Robert F. Kennedy, Cornel West. They're going to peel away some of the unenthused voters who might have otherwise stayed home. But predicting at this point where that's going to go is, I think, hard. There's one other point that I think is worth making, which is that even though it appears that America's 50-50 this time around, and it was 50-50 under Obama, there's been a big shift tectonically in American politics, right? College-educated voters are becoming more Democratic.
It's a different 50-50.
It's a different 50-50, and black voters are moving towards the Republican Party. Hispanic voters, by a fairly large margin of the last 8 years, have moved towards the Republican Party. If that continues, and if that realignment does surface, I mean, that is going to be the thing that determines whether or not the election is decided for Donald Trump, which he could very well fair and square win.
Sarah, I've noticed something interesting over the last week and a half, and looking ahead this week at Donald Trump's schedule. He's not doing very much. Now, some of that is that he doesn't have to, given the nature of the primary right now. But given what you just talked about in your polling and what it shows about Joe Biden, is there a strategic imperative here for Donald Trump to basically sit on his hands and not remind Trump-skeptical people why they're skeptical of him in the first place?
I think that's exactly his strategy, because when he does get up there, some of the things he says, like he's running against President Obama, some of the things don't make sense. So the less you put him out there, which was Joe Biden's strategy 4 years ago, I think is now becoming Trump's strategy.
So it becomes incumbent upon Democrats to elevate Donald Trump. I mean, this is a strange environment we're working in here.
I still wonder where Earth 2 is right now at this point, because even in strategizing and trying to prepare for the 2024, we can't look at what we've done in the past. It's a completely different environment. And part of it, and we were talking about this before the show, is that the amount of disinformation that Americans are consuming that does not have a counter narrative of truth is really something that we've never experienced before. And, doing the work that you do is going to be incredibly important, of creating that transparency, because people don't know who to trust or what to trust. And that's something that is really hard to weigh into.
Well, one thing that Americans of all stripes have decided not to trust, apparently, is George Santos. We are almost...
Amen to him.
Well, it is. I say it jokingly, but it is true. I mean, this is the one thing that seems to have united both parties. Yes. The likelihood that this guy is probably going to be out this year. Does it tell us something? Is this a litmus test for that it is, in fact, still possible to go too far off the deep end, to unite partisans on both sides, to say enough is enough? Or do we have to see what the vote looks like? I guess, Sarah,
absolutely, 100%. it's nice that we are united against removing a person who really should never have come to the House in the first place. So the Main Street members, we have all the members in New York except him, I want to say.
Interesting.
They're the ones who put together the legislation to remove him first. Another member of Main Street, the chairman of ethics, is now this legislation will pass.
Do you get the sense that Republicans will get credit for removing Santos at this point, or is that ship already sailed?
The New York members, we hope will get credit because his bad press and who he is bleeding into their districts. And with redistricting going on in New York, we need every vote we can get. So,
Idris, give us the big picture governing perspective on this. I mean, we had talked to Dan Kildee earlier in the hour. He's been in Congress, I think, almost 20 years, maybe more than 20 years. So guys like that are looking for the exits, and guys like George Santos are clawing their way in to try to stay as long as possible. It doesn't appear to bode well for the future of our legislative branch.
Yeah, imagine you were a well-thoughtful, nuanced person and you wanted to do public service. Is Congress the place that you would go to? I mean, polarization is so extreme. You have to hew to positions. There's no incentive to compromise. Once you get into office, you know as well as I do that it's not a place that's conducive to thoughtful policy making. You know, policies sort of decided based on truth socials and tweets. It's not a place that attracts our best and our brightest, unfortunately, at least in my view.
Well, on that happy note, I think we have to wrap things up. Thank you all for coming in. Maria, Sarah, and Idris, thank you for your maiden voyage on the program today. We appreciate having you. And thank you all for being with us for this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.